Thank you for tuning in to the LHP podcast, Love, Health, Prosperity. We're back with a special guest. Before I introduce him, though, I have a backstory to talk to you about. You know, when it comes to revolutionizing the things that we do to help people, sometimes we have to get really creative. And sometimes that comes about during hard times. For example, during the 9/11 attacks, we were faced with a lot of things that we didn't know what to do or how to react to them. But later we saw that there was brave souls that went in there and did a bunch of heroic things to kind of lead the way for healing. So this time around, when we had the lockdowns, I remember that we were pretty much all over the place. We didn't really know how to handle that. It was unprecedented times, and the fact that we had this whole pandemic type of thing where people didn't know what to do, how to react, was very difficult, not only on the world, but it was also difficult, particularly with us mental health professionals. So one of the things that really stands out during those moments was the fact that I got to meet a young man who was really creative in his approach, in being able to reach out to people and being able to say, okay, this is happening right now. This is what's going on in our homes. We really need to cope with this. We really need therapy. And I started seeing some of his techniques, and they were really interesting. At the time, we were working at a clinic doing mental health together. This young man's a therapist. He's a licensed professional therapist, not only in New Mexico, but also in El Paso. It's my pleasure to have today Ivan Torres. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Well, I'll be honest. I haven't kept up with the New Mexico license in a while since I've been working so much in Texas. I have been licensed in New Mexico, but I don't want people get the wrong impression or something, or someone look it up and
Oh, okay, all right. I think I had read that on your what is it? Your LinkedIn account?
Yeah,
I think
because I was licensed for a while, but I came back to working. I mean, I was just in Las Cruces, so it's right here, right? But I just kind of kept up with the license in Texas, and I thought as soon as I can get the supervisor license or something, maybe I'll keep up with the New Mexico one again.
Okay.
Yeah.
The LPCS, the famous LPCS, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So, I mean, what got you into doing therapy, Ivan?
It's kind of you know how a lot of us kind of get into mental health, but it's kind of you'll be an engineer, but you like looking up stuff on Instagram about mental health and all that.
Uh-huh.
I think that I was always into psychology and mental health, but I never thought, no, it's just something I'm interested in. So I did not start in psychology. I started off first in high school. You get to pick this kind of pseudo or semi-career, see what you're gonna look into. I'm oh, okay, well, maybe business, because my brother does business.
Okay.
And it's no, that wasn't for me. I finished it, but yeah, I went into UTEP, and I thought, okay, maybe computer science, because I think I like computers, and my dad's an engineer. And that also didn't pan out. After a year, I was yeah, I don't know. So I went to psychology, and I asked the advisor, if I took the first class, would that give me a gist of everything that's to come from psychology and maybe hopefully counseling?
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty much. So I just remember that response, because I was thinking he was gonna say no, you have to keep at it for a while.
Yeah.
And so. Yeah, so I got into that, and it's okay, well, this is more research-driven, stuff like that, right? Imprinting, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
All this stuff we do in psychology, but it wasn't really about the therapy. And so, I got through my degree. It took me a while. I could have gotten a PhD in that time.
Uh-huh.
But bachelor's a bachelor, and then so I got that. And then I didn't know we had the mental health counseling program at UTEP, because it was in education.
Yeah.
So it was
really good program, by the way.
Yeah, because it got accredited, right? So it's when I found out about it, it wasn't accredited. They were still wanting to. So I tried getting to that. My mentor said, no, go into clinical psychology, because that way you get the research and the clinical experience. But no, that didn't pan out as well, because even though I have a lot of research in my background, I was never about the stats and all that. That was that was really hard for me. And
the boring stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty boring. I mean, at least for me. Because a lot of people love all that, and more power to them. But it did help me, but I didn't finish the program. I thought, no, I'm just gonna go into mental health counseling, and kind of left out the back door. but I think that was the best decision. So whatever stats I did get in mental health counseling, that was super easy because it's like, you know, at least like, even though I failed miserably, like I did learn enough to like pass them really easily in mental health counseling. So I got my degree. But the point of it was, like, when I did research, we did a lot of like the clinical stuff. So I started off pretty early with interventions and stuff like that. And people will tell you, like, you know, the people who I work with will be like, well, that wasn't like therapy. It's like, no, but a lot of times it would turn into therapy because it was like, you know, a lot of people talking about, you know, we do like smoking cessation, you know, research, and it's kind of like, but people would start telling you about like, well, I started smoking a lot because, you know, my, you know, loved one passed away and things like that. And so you would have to get into the nitty-gritty of it sometimes. And so I kind of like dove into that pretty early. And then, so I learned a lot about motivational interviewing, which is great because you don't really need to be licensed to do a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, motivational, what is it? Motivational, that word that you used again. What was it again? Interviewing. Motivational interviewing. I know what you're talking about, but for those that are kind of watching us, what exactly is that? Well,
motivational interviewing, to like, you know, in layman's terms, it would be kind of like, how do I improve your motivation to change, right? Like, I can't get you to change completely, but like, if you're interested in, again, like maybe saying, I don't want to stop smoking, but your motivation is like at a 3 out of 10, right? Like, how do I get you to kind of like think about it a little bit more? So maybe it's a 6 or 7 out of 10, right? It's not a 10, but it's getting there, right? And so just kind of like putting the things at the forefront of kind of like what is motivating you to change. Your kids, your health, and things like that, right? And you would think like, well, that's stuff people already know, but I think the beauty of stuff like that is kind of like finding out stuff like, oh, well, you know, my dad died from smoking. So it's kind of like,
it deepens
like,
the motivation.
Yeah, it's like, you know, maybe I'm headed down the same path kind of stuff, right? So, I mean, it doesn't always work. Maybe you get like a extra point. Maybe people tell you like, oh, okay, yeah, I feel like a 7 now or whatever, just so you get you to shut up. But but that's also part of it, right? Like learning how to read people and figure out if they're just telling you something for the sake of telling you, like, yeah, I'm good. Let me head out. So yeah, so that would be like the motivational interviewing thing. I actually have my certificate in it, but it's been so long that I can't find it. So it's in my resume, but you know, but
that sounds like a hard thing to do, motivational interviewing. But I guess you get the gist of it afterwards, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of like a workaround for people who need to kind of like do something that's an intervention, but like you don't have to go all the way and get the license for like, you know, your 2-3 years and then your intern license and all that. But it depends on how you're applying it, for sure.
Okay, all right. Did you grow up in this area, the border city?
I grew up in Juarez. I was born here, but yeah, I lived kind of like, well, half my life in Juarez, and now it's been so many years I've been in El Paso for quite a while. And so, yeah, so I would say kind of like I got the best of both worlds, even though there's a lot of similarities, there's a lot of differences.
I like to talk about that because we are in the border city. This is very unique. So mental health, family, and lifestyle is just so dynamic around here. So I think it's very important that we touch upon those points. And I think it's important for people to understand that the people that we interview on this show is specifically going to give us insights as to what it's like to grow up in the border city and the challenges that we face also. So what are some of the things that you've noticed around here in your profession, of course, that you have stumbled across that pose as challenges to you?
As a kid, I remember, like, if you would visit a family member over here, it's different, right? Like, I didn't think it was as Mexican as it is, right? Because we're Hispanic, because, like, you notice the differences right away. So it's like, you know, grew up where, like, people were just outside all the time, and here, like, you could go through neighborhoods, and it's kind of, like, pretty quiet. And I just assume boring, right? Like I said, like, but no, I think it's kind of, like, more like how you perceive it, right? Like that you think like, oh, because the streets are quiet, that means it's boring. And it's like, no, it's kind of like, this is such a chill city, right? Like people I've met in the comments, like they just stay here, and I'm like, but why? Like it's like, you know, it's not like, you know, people who live from Chicago and stuff like that, and lived in Chicago and all that, and it's like no, but it's like people are really nice.
Yeah, they are
really nice.
They are, and I noticed that when I do go visit, you know, Juarez, and spend some time out there at a restaurant with the family, things like that, I notice that the environment is totally different. Yeah, people are a little more out there. They're not afraid to walk and, you know, pretty much interact, and there's the pace of the community is a little different than it is here. That's for sure. But I could see where you're coming from. You could take a walk around your neighborhood here, and it's quiet.
Yeah.
And you don't really bump into a lot of people going around the block, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but by that token, it's funny because like now you do hear the neighbor that's blasting the music and stuff like that, and now like I find myself on the other side of the coin being like, that's too loud.
Yeah.
But it's like no, they're actually like, you know, they're the ones that kind of like acting like the way that I would find normal back then, right? So it's funny how like we kind of like turn into kind of like the thing that we criticize and all that. But I guess what I'm saying is like I grew to love it because like, you know, it would be hard for me to go back to Juarez, and it's like, it's hectic, right? It's a lot, there's a lot going on. And it's nice to kind of like get from A to B sometimes, like here in El Paso, pretty quickly and all that. But another difference is, I guess, it's like kind of like the discrimination, like from like between like Hispanics, right? It's kind of like...
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. I think that's an interesting point to bring up.
Yeah, because I think that, you know, we just assume that like people left Mexico and... they don't have like that identity or something like that. I don't know how to word that. And it's funny, kind of like coming over here, and then people who are like, no, yeah, like they didn't do it like with pride, right? Like a lot of them want to know more about where they come from. A lot of people are like more, much more connected with like everything going politically and you know, culturally, even though they're not living in Mexico, right? And it's kind of like, it was very surprising. Or like people who are like, yeah, I just never learned like the quote unquote proper Spanish.
Okay.
And they feel like embarrassed about it when they have to speak with like people from Juarez and all that. And then the people from Juarez criticize that, right? Like thinking like they own it, and it's like, no, it's just like they're trying to get from A to B with these things. And why I'm saying that is because like I just kind of like I just kind of like stopped noticing that after a while. But then I would see like, you know, I would go to Juarez and stuff like that, and you know, like friends who kind of like, you know, like I would tell them like, oh yeah, like I have this neighbor, like he's Mexican. It's like, no, like he's Pocho. And it's kind of like
Pocho.
And and it's kind of like, no, like, you know, like I consider them like Mexican, right? Like it's kind of like, and of course like sometimes like there's like kind of like accent you get from like coming over here and all that, but like I think that's something that kind of I feel like still kind of creates a little bit of that divide, right?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a generational thing. I mean, the rules that are established at home, for example, I know for a fact that growing up, my mom and dad would always say, hey, well, here it's Spanish. And nothing else. Now you go to school, you talk with your friends, you know, you could talk all the English you want, but here at the house we want you to practice that Spanish, right? So I guess that was one of the things that was, you know, that was really set in our household. And I don't know if the generations now are doing that right now, but I know that, you know, it kind of goes along the lines of what you're saying with mixing languages together.
Yeah, and so that's a perfect example of kind of like what I'm trying to get at, because I feel like what am I trying to say here is that, right? Like I feel like there's a lot of people who will have that family who says, okay, you need to learn the Spanish, you need to speak Spanish here at home, whatever. But there's parts, you know, of the country, and I'm pretty sure here, even here in El Paso, sometimes it's kind of like people are telling you, no, you speak English here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where the person starts to get lost, right? And then sometimes, yeah, they don't feel like they're from one country or the other. And that creates a lot of stress, right? Like kind of like, you know, what is my identity then, right? Because their family can be very, very Mexican, but they're like very involved in the American community. And I get it, El Paso is kind of different in that way. But I'm saying more like the people who grow up, I don't know, like LA, like parts of California, that I feel like has like more like diverse communities and things like that, and of course much more Caucasian communities. So I think that a lot of people do feel a bit lost in that sense, and I do get how me coming from Juarez, I was even guilty of kind of like thinking less of people, right? And I feel like kind of like
that's interesting though. I like how you're saying that, but what how though? In what sense?
I don't know. I guess like, the same way like we can easily go into like if you were born in the U.S. and you're fed this information that people come here to steal your jobs and or bring crime and stuff like that. I think that I don't know. I might be wrong because I haven't looked up the research on that, but like I feel like there's this sort of kind of like underlying sense of betrayal, right, for the people that kind of like left and all that, right? It's kind of like I don't know, or like, or not even like how we feel about them leaving, but how we feel about them like coming over here, right, and being over here, right, and not knowing like not like having like one language or the other like combined in one sentence, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, I don't know. I just feel like it's kind of like we just don't like something that's different.
It's a little hard to adapt to that sometimes. I could totally see where you're coming from.
Yeah, but I guess like, I don't know. Like it's funny, and I feel like I defend that a lot more now. Like I go with my friends and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong. They don't like criticize or whatever. Like I had just one friend who does that. Right?
Do you hang out mostly with your buddies out in Juarez, or the ones over here on this side?
Well, and that's what I mean, right? Because I just stay here all the time now. Like I find it really hard to go back. I think I kind of like did identify with being here a lot of time, and
plus all the other things like having to wait in the line at the bridge, things like that.
Oh yeah,
those are factors, right?
That's a big factor. But I think that we always think about it kind of like, yeah, like you can get your medicine or something cheaper over there and stuff like that, right? But I do think it's a quality of life thing where like time time can be money, right? So it's kind of like you spend like a few extra bucks or something just getting your stuff at Walgreens or something, but like I guess like it's something that I don't know if it is a big deal or not. I think it is, and I think it's if we're gonna like hit like when we get eventually to the burnout of stuff, right? Like it's kind of, I think those little things happen in other contexts, right? Like everything going on with like the Black community and things like that. That how we still have these perceptions, and I think that because things improve, we stop seeing them as problems, right? And I was just thinking about that this morning, for example, like when we have these conversations and you see a lot of people like more Mexican stuff, and they like more like stuff from the Black community, like I don't know, I would say like hip hop, rap and stuff like that, right? And it's kind of like, and then we have this idea of like, because we accept that, there's no problems anymore, right? But we forget about the systemic problems about that, right? And so I guess like going back to your original question about kind of like do you still do that? No, like I guess you get used to something, because I used to reject this idea of being over here in the U.S. Right? I was kind of like, I'll just kind of get my degree, maybe I'll go back, and every weekend I will go back to Juarez and stuff like that. But you start identifying things with home once you understand the people around you, right? And again, it's not even that much of a change. I mean, this is very much a very similar like place to be in compared to Juarez, right? It's just like has a different structure to it, but like the people are very similar. But I think like the more you go into the U.S. and things like that, there are differences, and then that creates differences in how people treat you or talk to you, or even kind of like that form of like trying to be nice to you because people have been discriminated or mistreated. And so what happens there is like, well, you also don't want to be treated like that. You don't want to be treated like you're a sick puppy or anything, right? You want to be treated like the same as the next person, right?
Which brings me to everything. My next question. A lot of things are changing regarding the way we see therapy, the way we do therapy. And once upon a time, it was in person, and it was accessible. And then all of a sudden, we're hit with this, this thing with being locked down at home and not being able to access services as easy. And then people's minds shift also, and they start thinking about work and not being at work all the time. And you start noticing that a lot of people are having a hard time with that. How do you see that as far as the therapy, doing online therapy versus in-person therapy, and the changes that took place after the lockdowns and how people view work now?
Well, it's funny. I prefer in person, right? For sure. There is, again, quality of life with that. Like the same way that you don't have to I don't have to cross the bridge like every weekend. You don't have to like get up and get ready completely, right? You can just kind of like, do your hair real quick and put on like a nice shirt and do telehealth, right? But you don't lose that time, that commute. So there's things like that, and I think a lot of people take advantage of that. I think some people will take too much advantage of it. It creates a little bit of too much of a safe zone. Some people do need that. Some people, I feel like they do need to see you in person. But there's also like things like, your internet service might not be like the best.
Has that happened to you before?
Yeah, for sure. Like it still happens. And I do like have telehealth, have in person, but mainly because like, obviously now we kind of save up on office space and all that.
Yeah.
So that's good and bad. But like, but at the same time, like, it gives me time to like, be with my kid and everything. So it definitely is something we need.
That's golden.
Yeah. It's definitely something we need, but I feel like we kind of have to balance that out. And I think we are balancing out. A lot of my clients are asking, like, they refuse telehealth because they want to see me during my office hours. And I prefer that. And I tell them, like, I'm sorry, I know I don't have a lot of availability, but do try to schedule in person, if you can. And now I have gaps in the telehealth, like hours, right? But like, it affects me financially, of course, but like, I do like that. I do feel like people are kind of like willing to kind of like get up, get ready, and go see their therapist because like, they see it as an important part of their day. You know what I mean? And I feel like it still hasn't settled, but I think people are settling more into kind of like trying to see someone in person. Like I would say 70-30.
But have you noticed, or is it just me, that there's not a lot of therapists available right now? Everybody's booked, right?
Yeah, there's been a need, and I mean, I guess that's a good problem.
It's definitely a good problem if you're a therapist.
Yeah, but it might be not a good problem for the clients.
For the clients, definitely.
But to be honest, I think that, by that same token, we also have to make sure that we're doing good work, right? I hope that doesn't mean that we just kind of like throw, someone in there and it doesn't meet your requirements, your needs, because it used to be that I would tell someone like, if you don't like me, don't stop doing this, right? Because maybe it's just me. Maybe we and I just don't connect in the way that you needed it to. So I'll refer you or you go and find something for yourself. But I feel like right now with the need, it's kind of like, yeah, but it took me like a whole month or two to get to see you, right? And so I feel like I have the obligation to make sure I'm doing a good job.
Definitely. Yeah. So how do you connect with these people? How do you connect with your clients?
I like to think that my strengths lie in kind of like knowing how to be insightful about stuff. It's kind of like, have like a good analogy for something. Because I kind of forget the wording for the term sometimes, right? Like, or what I'm doing, right? It's kind of like, oh yeah, like that. I guess that was a bit of thought reframing, cognitive restructuring, or whatever. But like, but I kind of forget. I just try to make it as much as a normal conversation as possible. But I think it could be to a fault, at least at some point, right? Where it's kind of like, because, I think a lot of people are looking for like that structure, right? What do I do here? What's this called? What exercises do I do? How
do you manage a therapy session also, right? I would imagine some people go into their session not knowing what they're going to talk about, and you have to add that direction, right?
Yeah, I think like that's the one thing I do keep structured is like the assessments, right? That's kind of like the questions we have and everything. It's kind of like, so I get to know what brings them to therapy. But after that, it's kind of like, kind of like the gloves are off, right? We just kind of like head into it. But I think that it depends, right? I like to think that people like to actually not have so much structure, at least, and I would say probably this community, again, like until I work in other parts of the country, I'd like to think that people prefer the just having like make it seem like a casual conversation rather than a very like, you're seeing the doctor or something, right? Because you suddenly like are talking about your deepest, darkest secrets all of a sudden, rather than kind of like, okay, I have to do this today.
Yeah, you got to be vulnerable. You know how difficult that is for a lot of people?
Yeah, yeah. I think for the majority of people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But, you know, between like in the border city, for example, ¿verdad? Y ahí te voy a tirar una curva diferente, ¿verdad? Lo que viene siendo abrirte para poder platicar con un cliente, para abrir una plática, una charla que realmente les va a dar la dirección para que ellos tengan el tratamiento adecuado, ¿verdad? Eso es difícil, ¿no?
Sí, you have to consider that, you know, age, their culture, their history, their past, and all that, right? And then, but I feel like if you kind of like can get them to feel comfortable, man, they'll give you too much information. You know what I mean? But I think that sometimes there's a trick in like not knowing, right? Like, you know, if your client is from like a cultural or ethnic background that you don't really have that familiarity with, be open about that, right? And explain to me the things that you've been through that's different from the rest of us, right? Right? And then sometimes you'll find that there are, for one, and similarities, not in the sense like, oh yeah, I've been through that, because people don't like that, right? It's more of like, oh well, this has been my experience, or this, and be like, oh okay, yeah, you know, I guess we have like some sort of like place where like a level playing field. But if not, then explain that to me, because I want to understand where you're coming from, because there's still a lot of stuff I don't know, and I will never know or understand, right?
Yeah.
And so I think people respect that. I like to think so, that you want to get to know them, so you don't have to necessarily know where they're coming from, especially like, for example, military, right? Like, you know, people in the military, they come, and I'm already kind of like thinking, are they going to hate me because I don't know anything about the military? And sometimes I'll tell you, there are things that's best that you don't know anything about, right? Like, and I don't mean like their traumas, but I mean kind of like, you know, that you come in fresh, right?
Yes. Yes. So in this case, not knowing a lot about, you know, people in the military would actually put you in a position of advantage then sometimes, because you can be very neutral without making any preconceived notions, right?
Yeah, but they will say they prefer a therapist that has been in the military, right? So
okay. I
yeah,
I didn't know that. All right.
yeah. I mean, I can't tell you, but like, you know, I remember we did a study on that, and for, you know, it was just one population, one sample, and stuff like that. But I would say it's almost across the board. They prefer someone who has that experience. You know what I mean? But there was something about me knowing that I can be preemptive about it.
Yeah.
And saying like, hey, well, I'm sorry, I don't have any of that experience, so feel free to tell me what you're talking about and all that. You know, I mean, they won't be nice about it. It's not like a thing they need. But sometimes, hey, if you can, that'd be great.
That's cool. Yeah, definitely. I think being relatable is just very difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
But I know at the same time, like for example, you're quite young and you're doing therapy with, I'm sure, clients of all ages, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh, okay, this person here, you know, his education level, or, you know, is kind of high. I don't know. He's a little older.
Yeah.
How do you manage those type of cases?
I have like a good story about that. Hopefully it's a good story.
Yeah,
no,
like, stories are always good. You know that.
Like, he just goes off on this rant and there's nowhere. That like, well, first off, like, you know, when I started, I was 28 or 30 already, and so but people, you know, thought I was younger. So it's like, so they're like, oh, okay, so they would feel a little bit more comfortable, right? Now I'm 37, and so it's like, you know, it's kind of, I like anime, I like video games, so it's kind of like, you know, even if like
it makes you relatable.
Yeah, so like if my clients like those things, like it's kind of like, yeah, maybe they'll see me like the older guy, but they'll be like, oh, okay, cool, like, so I can tell them about that. Or if I don't know, because like I still don't like a lot of the things that kids play. But the minute I throw out like, oh, you like the first person shooters, they're like, oh, okay, so he knows. He doesn't do it, but he knows about it, right?
And I would assume that's a game or something like that, right? The first person.
Yeah, so like if you play Call of Duty or something, your first person, like your point of view.
Oh, okay,
so it's kinda
gotcha.
Like, yeah, so so I don't play Call of Duty, but I can understand that. But like I remember that there was this guy when we did like well, I won't say because then you'll figure out who it is, right? But like there was this guy when I did a training, and he was very educated and he knew all the terms, and to the point where like he referred to motivational interviewing as MIME, and I was like, what's that? And it's like, oh, he's talking about motivational interviewing because it's motivational interviewing, motivational enhancement, and it's like, so yeah, so he would make me feel pretty stupid, right? But I remember that. We were talking, and he just kind of took over the whole time. Not in a bad way, but it's kind of like he was the one. And I was just kind of like there. I didn't feel the need to kind of like chime in. Not that I felt like that much intimidated, but like, hey, he's doing most of the work.
Yeah.
And so, but they asked, what would you do here? What would you do there? And they're, Ivan, what would you do? And I just used an example, like, well, I had a client. I remember she did this, and she felt guilty about it. And I just made a joke about whatever, about like the cops coming to get her because she did. Whatever, she went too early on a date with someone or something, and everyone laughed. And I remembered like when the training ended, the trainer would like, you know, said bye to everyone, but she like came up and like almost hugged me and was like, she's like, I really like how you approach things, and you know, and then you have really good ideas, and that stuck with me because I'm like, I don't have to be like the smart ass, you know.
Yeah.
You know,
or you don't have to know it all, right?
Yeah, I don't have, and I feel like there's sometimes you know, you are relatable sometimes when you kind of like just speak their language, you know what I mean? And so, don't get me wrong, I don't think that you should always be like this. I think, like, you know, I think that we all should always kind of continue reading up on stuff and all that, but like to own our strengths sometimes, right? Because I think a lot of people in the community feel like they're not ready and they feel afraid of tackling certain things, right? Like certain clients. And so I tell them, no, don't worry about it. I forget what parts of the brain are named and stuff like that, or how they work.
If you know, that's very complex for sure.
Yeah, and so
it's
they're
not
like, okay,
it's not everyday information for sure. But I know that, you know, a lot of those names are even hard to pronounce, right? So much less to remember.
Yeah. And so I'll be like, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, so you do this so you release endorphins. Which ones? I don't know. I remember the names and stuff like that, right? But like, it's something that I feel like, I don't know. I mean, I like to think that people appreciate that, right? And they'll tell me that. But sometimes people are also like, they come in again like it's the doctor, and they feel like you know best. It's like, well, no. I mean, I'm also a human, and I want to make sure that you are getting like the best care possible, right? And so definitely.
And I think it's important that people seek out therapy and coping skills for sure. And I think you and I are going to talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'm an open book, and you know, one of the things that I like to tell people is that I strongly believe that people should always seek therapy, or if not go to therapy, do something that is really going to help them out, whatever the case may be, right? But in this case, people that are in our field, for example, you know, you're my therapist when I have you know, some sort of problem that I need to talk about. You know, I like to be able. And that's fine. I picking up the phone and be like, hey, Ivan, I need an appointment. And then Ivan says, well, you know what, I'm kind of booked, but I can see you on this day. And I think that's really cool. I think it's important for people to understand that that it's okay to reach out if you have issues, or if you need a therapist. There's nothing wrong with that. And the reason why I bring that up is because in one of our episodes we talked about stigma, right? And being able to, you know, jump that fence, right? And be able to talk. So I'd like to know your insights on that also, with therapy and our people here in the border city.
Okay, so what do you think are some of the stigmas? Like the whole, like, it doesn't work, or? No,
well, it's so much seeking out the help. You know, I know that there's a couple of songs out there in Spanish that talk about, you know, you're going to go to the doctor and that means something's wrong with you, right? Because of your, you know, headspace. Yeah,
well, it's kind of like, you know, I don't know if you've seen like the Instagram, and I like to put just stuff that's joking about that. Why? Because like, I think we have to own some of these things instead of like, you have to change this, or not change it, right? But like, you know, like you tell someone you have to be vulnerable. It's kind of like, well, it's kind of like, okay, you're telling me I have to be vulnerable, right? But if I joke that this is hard to do, then it makes it easier, right? It's kind of like, okay, so I'm not being stupid. Like, everyone has a hard time with this. And this one of like the comics I put on there was kind of like, you know, world's strongest man, and this guy lifting so much, and the other guy lifting so much more, and the third guy is like talking about his his weaknesses or vulnerabilities and stuff like that, and they're like, oh my God, so strong, and he gets like a 10 out of 10 or whatever, right?
That's a strength.
And so I think that's, again, right, like that's the typical thing that we talk about, right? It's like, that is a strength in and of itself. But how do I approach that, right? How can I tell someone like, oh, okay, well, you're being strong or whatever, right? It's like, yeah, that's not what my dad says, right? And so again, I use kind of like the stories, right? And so I remember one guy who said, we always say that someone has like a strong personality when they're easy to get mad. But if you think about it, that's kind of like a weak personality, right? Because they don't have the strength to kind of like keep from kind of like
controlling.
Yeah, controlling or managing those triggers, right?
Good point.
And so we reframe that, right? It's kind of like, well, are you being strong? Are you? And kids will tell me that, right? Like, if someone pushed you, what do you do? I'll punch them. It's like, why? Because you need to respect me. It's like, but how are you demanding respect in that regard, right? Right? I mean, and are you doing good in school? No. It's like, well, what does it mean to be a man? That you punch the guy that pushes you, or that you're doing the things that you are expected to do and you expect of yourself, right? And so, yeah. And so with a lot of clients, I don't try to kind of like, tell them, I don't try to tell them what to do, but a lot of them, for example, don't have like someone to talk about these things. Like maybe didn't have like a father figure or a bigger brother or something. And I don't try to replace that, but I do try to give them that talk that maybe they didn't have with someone. And so sometimes it's kind of like, well, this is hard and I can't get up in the mornings, or I don't know how to do this. And I tell them, well, I struggle with these things and I got through, right? But I'm not telling you because like, if you can do it, I can, like if I can do it, you can do it, right?
Yeah.
But it's more of a kind of like surprise yourself a little bit, right? And also you have to kind of like man up and do it, right?
Yes.
And it's kind of like, and I was afraid of doing that stuff. And I had like, the mom come in, it's like, the moment you said that, like they started liking you, right? Because like no one really has heard that, right? But I'm really simplifying it because like, anyone can like, that's seeing that right now, it's like, well, this and that, right? And so I kind of like prolong it, right? Like I tell like, a little personal story or a client's story, right? And how they did it, right? And how like, my brother would say like, you have to man up and do it. And I tell them like, that would piss me off because he wasn't understanding what I was trying to say. But then it's like, but then it dawned on me, I was spending too much complaining about it. And it's okay if like shit hit the fan, but at least I tried it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
And I tell them that story, like again, a long version of that. And they're like, okay, I get it. Well, they don't say it, right? But like, I'll ask them, does that make sense? Like, no, yeah, it makes sense, right? Like, it's not a fun thing to hear, but I am spending a lot of time, like kind of like sitting here and thinking about how to approach it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's okay if shit does hit the fan, like if it doesn't work out, but at least I'm not here thinking about it, right? But like this is over like what, 10 sessions, 20 sessions, so.
Yeah, pretty much. And like I said, being relatable has definitely got its challenges for sure. But what can you tell us a little bit, can you talk to us a little bit about burnout? And I know you have a family, so
yeah.
I know it's important for you to make sure that you're on your A game all the time, to make sure that you're not only providing therapy and making sure that you're not taking in all the stressors of listening to other people's stress.
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to touch upon what it is that we do as mental health providers to be able to disengage from work.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of balancing, right? I reduce my hours, and obviously that's less income, but like I fortunately have a little bit of that luxury to kind of like reduce that, right? And sure, now there's the stressor that, credit card goes a little bit up, but but you have to do that, right? Especially because, yeah, of course you want to spend time with your kid and your wife and everything, but you also have to know what you were capable of doing in therapy. So, I just had someone tell me kind of like, well, what if I did this and I would be helping kids and everything? It's like, yeah, but do you love doing that? Right? It's like, because it's like, it's coming from a good place, right? But like, I know that, the animal shelter might need help, but that's not where my strengths lie. You know what I mean? And I do like animals, but I don't love animals the way that other people do, right? And they're passionate about that, right? And so, for example, for me, I kind of like dive into things I don't like just to know what it's like, like working with kids, working with the elderly, military community and stuff like that. And now if I do get a client that's like a little kid or you know, someone kind of like talking about PTSD from combat and everything, I can at least get that going, right? At least to the point where like, oh, something opened up at the, you know, VA or something, right? And so they can do that. But not to say like, you know, usually they will stick, but I can't see like kid after kid after kid, because again, that's not where my passion's like. I do like seeing kind of like teenagers, and a lot of people don't like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'll do that. I'll take that on for sure. Right. And that burns me out a little bit less.
Okay.
Than, you know, kids, because I mean, children don't really have that insight just yet. They can't think in an abstract manner, right? So it takes a little bit more work on my end to kind of like see how they can understand the concept and everything, use different things. I know how to do play therapy. I don't like doing play therapy. I don't do that full time. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of like also manage your workload in the sense like, you know, hey, can you kind of like cut down on my couples counseling for a while, because I can't take so many.
That's cool.
So I think that's part of the burnout. It's like knowing where these things.
Know where to draw your limits, right? Your boundaries.
Yeah, and
your work
especially
boundaries.
when it comes with like to your caseload, what kind of caseload do you have?
Oh, cool. Awesome, man. I thank you for that, man. Believe it or not, we're already reaching the hour for our interview today already. But I did want for the audience to check you out and to see where they can actually find you. Can you give us a little bit of information about how they can, you know, perhaps work with you?
Yeah. So so if they liked any of the things they heard, I'm working right now at AVTS, right? I'm a contractor there. So I would say like if you are interested in like, you know, seeing me for a session or two or something, then then it is important to contact them, and then, you know, set up an appointment with me if possible. Again, it's kind of like limited, especially not so much because I'm in high demand, but my hours aren't like full time right now.
Okay. Tus clientes que hablan español. También.
Ellos también pueden buscarme igual en AVTS. Yo trabajo en el oeste. Entonces a lo mejor es un poquito más difícil si quieren verme en persona, pero pueden verme por videollamada. Yo trabajo independiente con Prevail, que es como que mi compañía.
Platícame un poquito de Prevail, por favor.
Cuando ya aprendí cómo hacer tu propia compañía, lo nombré.
Tu práctica.
Sí, como que sí, pues sí, porque no es compañía, pero con mi práctica solamente soy yo. No tengo otra gente ni nada, pero está bajo Prevail en caso de que si quisiera hacerlo un poco más grande. Pero no me gusta el administrativo, no me gusta tener que cobrarle al seguro médico.
Lidiar con las aseguranzas y todo eso, sí.
Entonces, eso lo hago yo solo por lo pronto, pero con eso veo gente de otras partes del estado.
Okay,
de que Austin, San Antonio, cosas así. Gente que esté batallando allá y aquí básicamente toda la gente que esté al Paso me ve por AVTS.
Perfect. Awesome, man. That's how they can get a hold of you.
Yes.
Okay. And I do know you have a Facebook page also, right, of Texas and New Mexico counselors? Is that what it is?
So you can, so that's the group we have. So like for any counselor that's interested in kind of like connecting or getting resources, they can go to Texas and New Mexico Therapists Facebook group, right? I forget about that because it's like, it just kind of runs itself. People are really great in there. I never had like, I've had to like ban like one or two people, right?
How long ago did you start that page?
Like 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it grew so fast.
Yeah.
So it was just for like friends, because like, oh, do you know anything? Yeah, so-and-so knows. And it's like, you know what? Everyone goes in the pile and you can kind of like share information. And then they just started inviting people. So it wasn't my intention to be able to like, oh, look at this. So I looked at it. I put on like a nice little like
layout.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. And some rules, but people have been good about it. Because I see other groups and then, some people are kind of like, this isn't probably like best for the group or whatever. But people have been good about that.
They're responsive.
Cool. So yeah, and speaking of which, so you can look me up under Prevail Mental Health on Facebook and Instagram
and LinkedIn.
That would be me on LinkedIn. But again, since I'm not like doing a lot of like the independent stuff, you can reach out to me and I'll kind of like help you out. But like I'm not like super busy on them because like then that means I take on more of a case. So
responsibility.
yeah, and so yeah, it's more work, and so yeah. But like, if you feel you want to talk to me directly, then yes. If not, then if you can go through ABTS, and so we can kind of like figure that out. They help me with the schedule and everything, so that's a lot easier for everyone.
Perfect, Ben. Well, I do want to thank you for being on the show today, for sure.
Thank you. Well, I feel like it was more like a story about than like
That's what a podcast is all about,
yeah,
man.
all right, sounds good.
People want to know the human side of things, you know. The processes are kind of boring to a lot of people. They want to know the human side of everything. I think that's the most important thing. So you did a really good job doing that, for sure.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Awesome,
I
awesome.
didn't want to go off on rants about like me. This is everyone needs to love me and cherish me.
No, absolutely not, man. You really put a good point across with a lot of the subjects that you touched upon today.
Okay, no,
so
thank you.
I thank you for that.
Thank you.
And also for you guys watching, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Look us up on social media as well. And please, we'll see you guys next week for another episode of the LHP Love, Health, Prosperity podcast. Thank you.